Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Wayne.
Hi, Ashley.
How are you?
I think I'm doing really well. I think I'm doing
You
really well.
think?
Yeah, I think, yes. I have to put it in perspective. I have to put it in perspective. Like, I'm happy and healthy, a little healthier than I should be, honestly. Too many quarantine snacks. And I have plenty of toilet paper and Netflix and anything that I might need to watch. So when I put things in that sort of perspective, then I'm doing great. How are you?
I love that we're going to be able to tell our grandchildren one day that we use toilet paper as currency for a moment of time.
I love one of my favorite quarantine COVID-19 coronavirus memes was it was one of those, conversation memes that people have. And it was like the grandkids were like, Grandma, why do you like sitting outside so much? And it's like her response is, once upon a time, this was illegal. And it was dated 2075 or
That sounds
whatever.
about right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So
But I'm good. I'm good.
good.
Yeah, lots of quarantine snacks myself. We have a delivery
Yeah.
of food on the way, all of
Good.
that.
These are all good things.
Oh, I got engaged.
You did get engaged. I was wondering whether or not we were going to mention that.
I guess we should.
Yeah. So congratulations to our queen and her queen.
Yes.
They will be, well, I don't know when, where, why, but you will be exchanging vows.
It's all
So
right.
we
We
know
don't
that
we don't
much.
quite know yet either, but probably more like winter time so that
Okay.
TJ and Lindsay can absolutely be here.
Okay, great. That sounds amazing.
Everything in my family is based around baseball season, and that's totally fine. We're okay with it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you're kind of a butch gal, so that
Oh
makes
yeah.
sense.
When I
Yeah,
want to be.
yeah. Okay, so and I do also want to say welcome back to all the queens, kings, and folks who are joining us again for another
Yes.
episode of the Slay Queens podcast. And we are, in fact, that podcast that does what, Ashley?
Take a deep dive into the dark side of the rainbow.
Yes, ma'am. We most certainly do. Shall we? Shall we do that thing that you call a thing?
The peruge.
The peruge. Yes,
Peruge.
ma'am. Shall we peruge?
We will peruge.
Okay.
Shout outs. I guess I'll start
Yes,
with the first one.
please.
We got a shout out from a Twitter account that's the future is female, which I guess, like you said, when you told me was kind of
Yeah.
more towards me, which is amazing and awesome. And thank you very much. Just women in podcasts, which was just great to be kind of put out there. Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's such an honor. And I feel very flattered to even be your side bitch with regard
I
to
love that.
that mention. So, yeah. Also, speaking of Twitter, we consistently get just the most amazing shout outs from a couple of accounts, and I do want to thank them again. True Crime, Blogs, Podcasts, and Missing Persons. That's the name of the account on Twitter. They shout us out very, very, very consistently for podcast recommendations and Follow Friday and things like that. And we just appreciate it beyond words. And also the Talking Shiz podcast gave us a good shout out again this week for Follow Friday. And again, they also do that for us pretty consistently. We are beyond words grateful for that as well. And B, I still think they have probably my favorite podcast name ever.
Oh, absolutely. I remember
Yeah,
when we first heard of them, we were both like, what? We thought we were creative.
yeah,
Damn it.
we thought we were doing something special until we happened upon
Uh-huh.
them.
Uh-huh.
Most definitely. But I think that's all for the shout outs that I have this week. Ashley, do you have anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, sweet. Would you like to tell all the folks what we will be discussing this week or who we will be featuring, or how would you like to proceed, my dear?
I mean, really, I just would call it, it's the Forensic Files episode, which you're going to have to tell us which collection, which episode, because I did not write that down. It's called Letter Perfect.
Yes. And it was not titled this in anything that I watched, read, or researched, but because
I want to know what you titled it. Yes.
Yeah, well, and plus we had already done a Deadly Love Quadrangle. We'd already done an episode on the pod for an episode that was also a Forensic Files episode. So I called this one Letter Perfect, A Deadly Love Triangle. That's what I've titled it in my notes. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's perfect.
Yeah. And as you were discussing, it was a Forensic Files. It was featured on Forensic Files. The episode was called Letter Perfect, which is featured on season 8, episode 26 of the original series. But if you're watching it on the Netflix collections, it's collection 5, episode 37. I know that's a little bit confusing, but those numbers aren't the same for some reason.
Sure. Yeah, that always has confused me. I've tried to look up episodes and been like, that's not right, but that's because I watched the Netflix version,
Exactly. I also got a little bit of information from some publications. One of them was on LehighValley.com. I also read some information from a publication written by The Morning Call, and also a good bit of information actually from allreadable.com, which laid out kind of a transcript of the Forensic Files episode, which was really good for me to go in and kind of extrapolate some information from that. So that was really, really great. But that's all I have as far as sources. So do we want to dive into this?
Let's do it.
All right. Pardon me. Do you need to clear your throat or anything, Ashley? Go ahead and get that out of the way.
I can't stand you, but I love you.
I know. That's part of my charm.
Is
making those that love me hate me just a little bit.
I absolutely feel that. Me too. That's why we get along so well.
Exactly. All right. Let's talk about this.
Yes.
Early one morning in 1992, Emergency Medical Services, shout out to EMTs and paramedics, responded to the scene of a residence in Raleigh, North Carolina, where a person was reported to be unconscious and unresponsive. There, they discovered a young man by the name of Michael Hunter in his bed, deceased. An assessment of the victim would reveal that there was no evidence of trauma to the head or chest, nor any other injuries that might explain why he was dead. Michael had been a seemingly healthy young man. He was a 23-year-old recent college graduate embarking on a successful career as a computer programmer. Michael's roommate, a man by the name of Joseph Menino, told police he found Michael unresponsive when he tried to wake him up to go to work. Emergency services reported that the victim appeared to have just gone to sleep and never woken up. So dun dun dun.
Yeah, dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. But as we all know, there's probably a little bit more to that story.
Right. There's going to be something. Or else we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah, and there most certainly wouldn't be a Forensic Files episode about it, right?
Uh-huh.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about why there is more to this story. Michael's autopsy was performed 2 days after his death by a medical examiner named Dr. John D. Butts. And I'm not making that up.
Oh, this poor guy.
Butts. So let's have a 13-year-old snicker about it and move on.
Yep.
Yeah. The initial examination revealed no intrinsic medical condition that would explain his death and no evidence of any injuries that might have had any bearing on his death. And in layman terms, that just means they didn't discover any undiagnosed medical problems that may have caused Michael's sudden death, along with the fact that there were no obvious signs of external injury. There were also no internal injuries that they could find on autopsy. So basically, they said that they did all of the kind of routine stuff as part of autopsy, couldn't find a reason why this poor young man would have died suddenly.
Mm-hmm. No foul play.
No foul play at that point, which is kind of the routine things that they do. But at that point in the investigation, the chief medical examiner for the state of North Carolina suggested that perhaps there should be some additional toxicology studies done. And just a side note here, for those who don't work in healthcare or who are maybe newer to true crime, physicians, whether they're working with living or dead patients, often order lab work to test for the presence of very specific things, which tend to be things that they see most often. So in general, lab work is looking for the presence of controlled substances, i.e. narcotics, sedatives, et cetera, et cetera. or signs of illness or organ dysfunction, i.e. blood counts, electrolyte imbalances, et cetera, et cetera. So if all of those things come back normal or they come back negative, they then have the option to test for the presence of other things, but it's not something that they do kind of routinely or on a day-to-day basis. So it sounds like when they reached out to the medical examiner for the state or the chief medical examiner for the state, they said, hey, we can't find anything wrong with this guy, 23 years old, healthy, what else should we do? And he said, hey, do some more tox screens and just see what you can find. Mm-hmm. Did you get anything different?
No, that is exactly what, anything different.
All right, cool. Further toxicology results of Michael's blood told an unexpected story. He had traces of 2 different over-the-counter antihistamines in his system, diphenhydramine and hydroxyzine, which is really just Benadryl, along with a lethal dose of a medication called lidocaine. Now,
dun, dun, dun.
Yes, big dun, dun, dun here. And now a little bit of a backstory on lidocaine. This is not something that you can traditionally buy over the counter. It's a medication that's often used for local or topical anesthesia, aka this is going to reduce sensation to small body surface areas to decrease pain associated with procedures like getting stitches. So like, I don't know if you or any of the listeners have ever had stitches or something like that. Before those procedures take place, they go, we're going to give you a little something to numb you up. They often use lidocaine for that sort of thing.
That makes sense. I'm pretty sure that's something that's like an active ingredient in like the spray they use for tattoo artists to numb it once you kind of open the skin. I'm pretty sure that's what's in there.
That's one of the topical like purposes or uses of it.
Sure. But makes sense though.
Yeah. Lidocaine can also be used as an injection though in the treatment of certain irregularities of your heartbeat or your heart rate. When used in this way, the medication works extremely quickly and the maximum safe dose has to be given based on the person's body weight because overdose can be toxic, resulting in almost an immediate death. And I know that because it's something that is not so much in protocol now for us as emergency care workers, but we used to use lidocaine a lot for certain heart dysrhythmias. With no resuscitative efforts having been performed by emergency services when they showed up and they found Michael dead, investigators couldn't explain why the lidocaine would be present in his body. They began to suspect foul play. But who, Ashley, would have a motive to harm Michael?
Who? I
wonder. do you think the owl did it?
Ooh, yeah.
Did the owl do it? Okay.
Let's talk about his real life.
Yes. Let's talk about who Michael really was, and who might have had motivation to do something bad.
Right.
All right. So further investigation into the life of Michael Hunter would answer that question, actually. Before his death, Michael had been living in a small one-bedroom apartment in Raleigh with 2 roommates. So first kind of red flag there, that maybe things aren't as they might seem. 3 young men all living in a small one-bedroom apartment. That would make me, I would have further questions.
Yeah.
One was a landscape architect whose name was Gary Walston. And the other roommate was a 26-year-old medical student who actually was like 4 weeks out from graduating medical school and testing to get his licensure and start residency by the name of Joe Menino. And just a reminder, we've already mentioned Joe because he was the person who actually found Michael and called 911 the morning of his death.
Yes.
When questioned about their relationship with Michael, authorities would discover a truth that not only shocked them, but also shocked those closest to Michael, including his mother and his father. Do you want to drop this big bomb on us, Ashley?
It's like can you even imagine? Let's also mention this is in 1992, right? Let's remember that. So, yeah. I mean.
In North Carolina, so not necessarily the most progressive part of the country.
Where this is like a situation that like we talk about often now and it's totally cool and a little bit more accepted, So yeah, they all found out at the same time that these three gentlemen were in a relationship together.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Unbeknownst or unbeknownst,
Yes.
unknown,
Pronouns.
unknown,
Yes.
unknown to those closest to Michael, he was in fact gay. And not only was he gay, but as you mentioned, he, Gary, and Joseph had all been in a romantic relationship with one another.
Well, yeah, that's one of the crazy things about it too, is like how his mom was like, I didn't even know he was gay. And I'm like, I can't imagine. I just lost my son, didn't know he was gay, also didn't know that he was in a very committed, very serious relationship with two other men.
Yeah.
That's a lot for this poor woman. Well, obviously a lot for the dad too, as we're gonna find out.
Yeah, I didn't actually include much of that, but yeah, a lot for her especially, but a lot for the dad, because when all of this kind of came up and came out and all of this information was happening and they were grieving the loss of their son, do you want to tell us what happened to the father?
Well, like the mom said, she kind of went on about how it was too much for him to handle, because it was like something had happened to his son that he had no control over, and he could never change it. So he ultimately ended up taking his own life. So that's another thing that this poor woman now has on her plate,
Exactly. Not only grieving the loss of her son in a questionable way, but grieving the loss of her husband, who essentially died of a broken heart.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
that's sad.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but that's a lot to find out about your son. The fact that not only had he been gay, but he had been in a very committed relationship with two men. And without getting too far ahead of ourselves, let's put a pin in had been a couple.
That's a very good point. Yes.
Yeah. Gary told investigators, quote, "Well, it was an unconventional relationship because I think in any sense of a relationship, there are typically only two people involved. And having a third person involved, I think, brought in a dynamic that was very different and maybe in some ways very exciting, but also created problems that I don't think any of us could have anticipated," end quote. The three men reportedly considered themselves life partners in every sense and even exchanged rings, promising to stay together and to stay faithful to their arrangement. Which, I mean, is admirable. I mean, up to that point, right? Especially considering that, like you were saying, it was like 1992, and this was a very, for lack of a better term, unusual lifestyle for people to be living, at least at that time. So
right, absolutely.
I find it admirable that they said, this is who we are, this is what we're committing ourselves to, and we want to show the world. Maybe they weren't super open about it, but at least they were wearing rings and being committed in that
they had
sort
their
of
commitment
way.
Yeah, I mean, commitment's hard to find for anyone, so the fact that these three can find it in each other, then good for you, except for what ultimately ends up happening.
Yeah, and this is the point that we've gotten to. There is always a however, right? However, it wasn't long before problems developed among the three. The main problem was that Michael had not been getting along with Joseph. Due to the conflicts between those two men and the stress the situation was causing Gary, who of course was the third gentleman involved in the situation, eventually Michael Hunter and Gary Walston decided that Joseph Menino had to go. Just 1 week prior to Joseph's mysterious death, he and Gary had told Joseph that though he could sleep on the living room sofa until finding himself a new home, he was going to have to move out. That the two had formed a closer bond as a pair, and Joseph was no longer welcome to be involved in their relationship. With this information, so of course police have just gotten a hold of this bit of information about Michael's life. With this information, police quickly identified Joseph Menino as their prime suspect. As a medical student, he would have had easy access to lidocaine, and he would have had the training necessary to give an injection.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's not forget what he was doing with his life, too.
He's a healthcare worker. Investigators believed that the breakup of the love triangle might have given Joseph Menino motivation to kill. Gary's involvement in Michael's death was quickly ruled out because he was actually out of town at the time that Michael was killed. So he was quickly ruled out as a suspect, but it's all kind of lining up so that Joseph is seeming more and more, at least potentially guilty, right?
Kind of obvious. One would think.
One would think. All right, so further investigation into the situation. When officially questioned as a suspect, hasn't been just has already been questioned as a witness, but now he's being kind of more intensely questioned as a suspect, Joseph gave police an unexpected piece of information. He admitted that on the night Michael died, Joseph had given him an injection of antihistamines for the migraine headache he was suffering. Antihistamines, though not common, are an acceptable treatment for migraine headaches in the fact that they treat the associated nausea that you might have along with a headache, and they will also make the person drowsy, thus helping them sleep through the pain, which I very, very, very rarely personally experience migraine headaches, and that's the go-to for me, is if I can fall asleep and just kind of ride it out in that sort of way. Traditionally, I'm all better when I wake up. So I can buy that someone might use antihistamines as a treatment when they have migraines, especially if it's something that they suffer routinely.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I was going to ask you too, when I was like learning about all of this, like how it's not common, but it works. I was like, well, I'm going to have to get his opinion on this.
Yeah. Well, and also it didn't surprise me so much because, so I don't know how often you've had to be given anti-nausea medications, but the old gold standard, well, the current gold standard is Zofran. But the old gold standard for many, many years was a medication called Phenergan. And you probably had that, like if you were sick when you were a kid or like had surgery when you were a kid or something like that. But Phenergan actually is an antihistamine medication that just happened to have like this side effect of having this like anti-nausea effect, right? So you can take antihistamines because they all have a little bit of that like anti-nausea side effect. So it didn't surprise me at all that they're like, well, gave him antihistamines for this because it helped with the nausea, it helped make him sleepy, and he went to bed. So traditionally, if I'm self-medicating at home because I'm a healthcare worker and I do that a lot because I'm a horrible patient, if I'm experiencing nausea and I don't want it to progress into something a little bit worse, then I'll take antihistamines at the house because they'll settle my stomach.
That makes sense.
The more you know.
Yeah, the more I love that.
Okay, forensic findings seem to corroborate this. So they knew that he had antihistamines in his system. So what they found seemed to corroborate this version of the story up to this point, at least, because those were the two medications that Michael's toxicology report had listed. However, it did not explain the lidocaine. And when asked about it specifically, Joseph said no. He had not given Michael any additional injections or any additional medications. Further corroborating Joseph's claim of innocence, authorities would soon discover a typed suicide letter on a floppy diskette in the computer desk among Michael Hunter's things. The letter allegedly typed by Michael before his death said that he suspected that he was HIV positive, and because of this, he was going to kill himself, stating, quote, "I will use some medication that I found in Joe's black bag. Don't blame him. Forgive me," end quote.
Don't you love it when they try to do that?
It's always like, I understand that we're not dealing with like a criminal mastermind here. This is, I'm hoping the first time he's allegedly up to this point ever done anything like this, but we've talked about this in other cases where you're like, don't blame this guy. Like, why in those final moments of your life would you go, hey, don't be mad at this person. It's all me. It's all my fault. They're innocent. It doesn't happen that way.
No. I just can't understand why someone would think that if you literally say it wasn't this person, it's human nature to then immediately think it was probably that person.
Exactly. And I think the last time we discussed a situation like this in a case, I'm like, it's stupid. It's just like being like, don't look over there, because what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to look over there, right? So it's a bit silly. All right. So In order to officially rule the cause of death a suicide, based on this, supposed suicide note, investigators had to confirm that Michael Hunter had actually written the letter. But the document being purely electronic with no handwriting for comparison, no paper, wasn't written on paper so that they could pull fingerprints or DNA. Not that I don't think they could pull DNA off of, maybe they didn't have touch DNA in 92 maybe, but they definitely could do fingerprints. They couldn't do any of those things because the evidence in itself, in the form that they had it, was pure language. That's all they had to go on, was pure language. For that, the police turned to forensic linguistics expert, Dr. Carol, let's call her Chasky. Let's go with Chasky. Sorry.
All right.
Carol Chasky, Dr. Chasky. And honestly, I know a lot about true crime, but I think this is probably the first time I've ever heard of a forensic linguistics expert.
Girl, I said the same thing. When I saw that come up on the screen, I was like, I want to do that. Why have I never heard of this before? That's genius.
And in case anybody else is unfamiliar with it, linguistics is not so much the study of what a person says, but how they say it.
It's like what every woman studies all the time when their partner talks to them.
and at least gay men, because I can speak for that.
Have you ever heard that? Yeah, have you ever heard that or said that? Well, it's not what you said, it's how you said it.
Exactly. How people combine words to make phrases and sentences is known as syntax. According to Dr. Chasky, what makes an individual's use of language distinct is the pattern of simple and complex phrases which they use versus the pattern of simple and complex phrases that another individual uses. So basically the way that I would term things and make up sentences versus the way that you would. Mm-hmm. And that's how we each kind of have our own pattern, our own signature of how we do that. And like you said, we all kind of know that. We all kind of know that. It's almost, it takes me back to, and I can't think of specific cases just because I've heard it in so many cases. It takes me back to situations where somebody said, I got a letter from this person that was missing and it just didn't sound like them. Or I got a text from so-and-such's phone, but it just didn't sound like her. It just didn't sound like something that she would send. I'm so familiar with her kind of digital fingerprint, so to speak.
Yeah, well, it's like in everyday life when you think like your partner or a friend or your boss or someone is maybe like texting different. Like, oh, well, are you upset? It's like, well, just because you don't see emotion over text, but you can tell just by how someone typically would send a text.
Absolutely. And you immediately get that, just like that tiny little like inkling of, okay, is something wrong? Because this is different. And I think, at least I do, I immediately go, okay, well, different must be bad. So what's wrong?
Yep. Me too.
Yeah. I think it's the anxiety that we both have.
Absolutely. Yeah. What did I
do? What did I do wrong? All right. So Dr. Chasky was given known writing samples from Michael Hunter and asked to compare those to the suicide note. Her findings were, quote, given how the statistical results turned out, I can conclude that Michael Hunter definitely did not write the suicide note, end quote. Dr. Chasky then analyzed known writing samples from Joe Menino, concluding that the note was, quote, most likely written by him. So nothing definite, but she said it was most likely when she compared the two writing styles, or the two syntax styles.
Well, yeah, it's just one nail in the coffin, right?
Exactly. This further disproving the possibility of suicide. It was proven that Michael was actually not HIV positive at the time of his death. So that information in the letter didn't make any sense. It was a lie. Additionally, it was, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was just saying that was a good point. I forgot about that part, that they were able to figure that out, obviously. So that note wouldn't even line up.
Yeah. Additionally, it was determined that the amount of lidocaine in Michael's body would have incapacitated him within seconds and would have killed him within 2 minutes. This made the possibility of suicide even more unlikely since there were no syringes found near the body or anywhere near him at the crime scene.
Oh my gosh. At least try to set something up. Like, geez, Louise.
Yeah. And like, that's one of the things, even without reading this specifically, that's one of the things that I thought, having been someone who's administered lidocaine before, like I said, we used to use it for heart dysrhythmias. It's a big vial. This is like a 10 cc syringe. This isn't just like a little, like teeny tiny, like syringe that you might get a little vaccination shot with or something like that. It's huge. So the amount of lidocaine that was in his system, he would have gotten maybe through half to 3/4 of the injection before he'd have been out. And the effing syringe still would have been in his arm if there were no one else around. And even if, you know, like gravity had been at play and it had fallen out of his arm, out of the vein, like into the bed or onto the floor, they still would have found it if there were no form of foul play or cover-up involved, right?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, come on.
So it's just not looking good for old Joe. Just not looking good for him. Okay. And so what had happened?
What had happened?
Exactly. What had happened? All right. When confronted with all the investigation findings, Joe Menino changed his story. He said that Michael had complained of a migraine headache on the night of his death, and in an attempt to ease his pain, Joseph gave him an injection of antihistamines and lidocaine. So now he's saying, okay, like I said, he had a migraine, and I tried to make him feel better, but it wasn't just the antihistamines. Like I said, there was also lidocaine in the injection. But he claimed that the overdose was an accident and that Joseph wrote the suicide note just in a panic. Ultimately, it would be up to a jury to decide what really happened on the night that Michael Hunter died. So all of this started in 1992. By 1993, Joe Menino was officially charged with, or he was indicted for, first-degree murder charge for his former life partner, Michael. Prosecutors alleged that Joseph was a spurned man in a love triangle and had knowingly committed murder with a lethal injection of lidocaine so that he could continue his relationship with the third partner, Gary Walston. However, defense attorneys argued that Michael had asked him for an injection, had this known history of migraine headaches, had asked the medical student who lived with him for an injection to kind of ease some of the pain, and that Joseph had accidentally given him too much lidocaine. So then, of course, the trial takes place, officially charged in 1993 or indicted. And then in 1994, after I think they said just a 3-week trial, Joseph Menino was convicted of a lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. And I'm just going to give that a little. Whoa, watch your step.
Yeah, I mean, this kid wasn't like a brand new med student. He knew how much he was giving this guy.
Yeah.
That's
and like I said, that's not a small shot. You have to know. You have to know. Plus, yeah, he was about to start his residency. So he essentially had completed medical school, and he was to the point where he was going to be treating, actually treating patients. He was going to be a licensed physician.
Yeah, that's why that's complete bullshit to me.
Yeah. Although I can't totally negate the beliefs of some of the jurors, because some of the jurors believed that there was at least reasonable doubt that Michael Hunter may have agreed to the lidocaine injection and that Joe Menino just made a mistake. And I have to agree that with our judicial system the way that it is, if the defense has created any form of reasonable doubt, you have to say, okay, this is possible.
Yeah.
I still think it's bullshit, but I'm not going to completely fault the jurors for kind of their stance. It just means that the defense attorneys did their job, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's very true too. That's a good point. I mean, everybody's getting paid in this situation, so.
Exactly. So ultimately, Joseph Menino would go on to serve just over 2 years of, what was it, a 6 or 8 year sentence. That's what he was
I think
sentenced to. Yeah, for
about 8 years.
Yeah, 8 years. He would only serve just over 2 of those years in prison before being released back into society. Which again is...
Yep.
Wait, don't let me down, buddy. Yeah. And one of the stipulations is that he was going to be sentenced to this lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter, but one of the stipulations is that he could never practice medicine as a doctor, which is fair.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, completely fair.
I guess.
Yeah. But let's talk a little bit more about that, shall we?
Yes, we shall.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. Let's fast forward to November of 2008, because in November of 2008, Joe Menino was fired from his job where he had been working as a registered nurse for the Lehigh Valley Hospital in Lehigh, Pennsylvania, after it was discovered that he had lied on a nursing school application and an employment application for the hospital as to whether or not he had ever been charged with any crime greater than a misdemeanor. So this bastard did his time, or not all of his time, but he did some time for involuntary manslaughter, which is bullshit. Said, okay, well, I can't practice medicine as a doctor, so I'm out of prison now. I'm going to move to a different state. I'm going to enroll in nursing school, lie on my application, made it through nursing school. They said he graduated top of his class, then went on to work as a nurse in a hospital, lied on his employment application there, and then they were just doing background checks, because I imagine, I know when I worked at the hospital, we had to do at least a certain background check. I think it was annually or every 2 years. So this eventually caught up with them. Mm-hmm. They found out that he had lied, that he had been convicted of this involuntary manslaughter charge. So he, I believe, was charged with fraud. In this case, lost his job, lost his nursing license, of course, because it's not something he ever should have had in the first place. So sure. Joe Menino, all around trash ball.
So that was literally, I mean, you answered all my questions, but that was the first question I was going to have is like, okay, number one, they said you can't practice as a doctor. Mm-hmm. And I felt like there was a little bit of emphasis on that.
Yes, there is some emphasis.
So I'm like, so then what did he do? And then, you know, you said he went to nursing school and then became a nurse. And I'm like, well, what fucking place took him with a felony charge like that? And, you know, all the questions were answered, but
yeah,
good grief, this guy. Mm-mm.
Yeah. And in defense of the nursing program and in defense of the hospital that he got a job for, he would have gone to nursing school in like 2005, 2006, and he would have started working for the hospital in like 2007, 2008. And like I said, hospitals often do these checks, I think yearly, sometimes every other year. But at that point in time, I read specifically that at that point in time, that nursing program didn't do like a federal background check on all of their students. It is now part of their policy, not since this specific incident with him, but just to be more strict with regard to like the people that they're letting into their program, that they do like a fingerprint check, like a federal background check before they allow these people into their program, which is really common in healthcare now. Like when I first got licensed in healthcare in like 2001, and they got my paramedic license in 2005, I didn't have to do fingerprints. I didn't have to do a federal background check. But just a few years after that, in like 2008-ish, I think there must have been like a federal mandate or something that said, before you can be licensed, before you can be trained, before you can get into these programs, we have to make sure that you didn't kill your ex-boyfriend with a lidocaine at some point. Yeah.
Oh, we'll just throw that one out there.
Yeah, just throw that one on top of the pile. But that is the sad, tragic story of a deadly love triangle, and the loss of, young life. Honestly,
like for absolutely no reason. It's not like he did anything horrifying. I mean, it's just so sad.
Yeah. And then of course like you said, the kind of fallout It didn't just stop at Michael Hunter's death. I mean, his father suffered depression and then committed suicide because of his son's death. His mother had to mourn the two of them, and who knows what this poor woman has dealt with since then. And
I do think that's a big thing, that someone who's kind of like a one-off, like emotional type murderer, is they don't think about everybody else that it's going to affect.
Yeah.
They don't think about, because I mean, I do think this guy, I'm thinking he's some kind of like, psychopath or anything. I think he's got emotions. I think he has empathy, but they don't think about that. They're just being a selfish asshole in the moment, and don't think about, like you said, the fallout.
Yeah. And I mean, not to make generalizations or stereotypes, but he was young. He was impulsive, I'm sure. And there is definitely something about people who have a certain amount of, air quotes, power over life and death. And he's this young, like, medical student who I think probably was impulsive and thought, you know what? I'm a doctor. I can give life, but I can take it away.
Right.
And I've met people that were like this, not to the extent that they like went out and killed someone, but
Sure.
I've definitely met a lot of people who kind of had that like God complex because of working in a very important position in healthcare. And not to make generalizations or talk trash about healthcare workers, because love them, need them, appreciate everything that they're doing right now, especially. But
yeah, people can get, a big head and a big ego just because like you said, it's a position of power.
Yeah. And power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
That's a real saying.
Yeah. All right. I think that's all I have.
I think I'm good here too.
Okay.
It was a cool little story. It was definitely, even us talking about it, it's still good to go watch. Like, it's still interesting to watch.
Yeah. And I think you suggested this one. So thank you, because this was a really interesting little story. And it's always kind of fun for me to hear about these cases and pick up on clues that like my healthcare brain picks up on immediately.
Yes.
So like the thing with the lidocaine and a couple of other things, I was like, oh, bullshit before I even, did real research on it. So yeah, this was a fun one for me. So thank you, Ashley.
Well, thank you for letting me do this one with you.
Yes. And thank you to all the listeners, all the fans, all the queens, kings, and folks for joining us again for another episode. And if people want to show us love or reach out to us, where can we be found, Ashley?
On Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. We are on Apple Podcast, Breaker, Spotify, Patreon.
All the big ones.
All of them. And we're all at Slay Queens Pod.
They're all Slay Queens Pod. We're super easy to find. Most of the time when you look us up, you can see me and Ashley like just pure mugging at each other.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. But thank you, everybody, for your love and support and praises. We would ask that if you are listening to us on Apple Podcasts, that you would go in and give us a 5-star rating and review, just because higher rating and review helps us kind of be put into circulation so that we're suggested to other listeners, and we want as many folks in the queendom as we can get. And you can also now watch us on YouTube.
Oh yeah, we're doing that now since we have to be in our quarantine lands.
Yeah, so if you want to see me with this busted fade and this
me fuzzy, with my roots.
Yeah. She's rocking the Rachel.
I mean, I'm kind of here for it at this point. I just, I gave up.
I actually kind of love it. I'm not even lying to you. But thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, everybody. And go out and slay, queens.
Just not each other.
Just not each other.